All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Soil Health 101 webinar hosted by King Conservation District. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure that we will have some folks continuing to filter in over the next few minutes. But I'd just like to first introduce myself and go through some quick housekeeping. So, hello, my name is Zoe Nelson. I'm the Education Program Manager at King Conservation District. Just for your knowledge, King Conservation District is a non-regulatory special purpose district. So it's like a school district or a fire district, except our focus is on natural resource management. We work with King County residents to help manage their natural resources through responsible and sustainable stewardship. And we also provide technical assistance to private residents in forest management, farm conservation planning, wildfire preparedness, and streamside and shoreline enhancement. Our speakers this evening will go into greater depth of explaining more about King Conservation District and what we have to offer. We do have many different environmental programs, and one focus is education and outreach, which is who's bringing you this program tonight. So we're really grateful that you're here with us. So thanks again for joining us for Soil Talk 101. I'd like just to take a quick moment to have KCD staff who are joining us to introduce themselves. So Emma, why don't you go ahead and just share your name and your title here tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma. I'm the AmeriCorps placement with the Education Department at KCD. I assist with programs and I help with mostly high school education programs.
Thanks, Emma. Madeline, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Madeline. I'm the education coordinator at KCD. So I help out organizing a lot of our education programs.
Thanks, Madeline. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening, Jay Miro, who's our Senior Resource Specialist in Rural Land Stewardship, and Megan Weldon, who's a Resource and Dairy Planner with Rural Land Stewardship as well. And they are going to be going through soil health this evening. So take it away, Jay and Megan.
Awesome, sounds good. Yeah, so Jay and I have been giving this presentation for a little while now. We both, as Zoe said, we work in the rural areas of King County. So our job is to go out and help people learn how to steward their properties, whether it's a crop farmer, a horse farm, and the whole range of large and small rural lands in our county. And we help you with learning best management practices to steward your property. And a lot of that comes down to ways of protecting soil health and water quality, which are both really important in the county that we live in. And so this presentation evolved because we found we were getting a lot of similar questions for people who are wanting to learn how to better manage their soil for plant production for a variety of reasons. While we do work mostly in the rural sphere of our county, this presentation is meant for everyone. And so I've given this presentation in Seattle, kind of all over the Flower and Garden Show at different years. And so it's developed for any size space or any type of management. So hopefully it covers most of the questions you have, and feel free, we love lots of questions, especially hard questions. So feel free to, don't be shy about putting questions in the chat throughout our talk, and we'll try to address all of those at the end. Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about KCD, the King Conservation District, and Zoe a little bit touched on what we are. But I also just wanted to say, if you're watching this but don't live in King County, definitely reach out to your local conservation district. We're often spread through word of mouth because we're a small special purpose district, but we have so many resources that people often don't know about. And so even if you live on the border of King County, tell your Snohomish neighbor to reach out to the Snohomish Conservation District or Pierce Conservation District. Pretty much every county in the state has their own conservation district, and we're all a little bit different, but we all have lots of services that are intended for folks to take advantage of. So feel free to do that.
Hello, I'm Jay Miro,
Mhm.
and I'll be sharing the presentation with Megan tonight. And so Megan, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Sure. Jay has been a planner for how many years?
Oh, I'll be on my 23rd anniversary this year. Thank
Just
you.
a few years. So, so awesome. So this is a quick outline of what we're going to be going over today. Who is the conservation district and how and why soil conservation is so important to districts, and why it's important to care about soil conservation. A quick soil 101, just to have a basic understanding of what soil is, so then we can then talk more about our soil testing program that we have, how to collect a sample, and then once you get those results, how to understand those results, which also in turn helps you understand your soil better, and then ways to use that knowledge to improve your soil health and fertility. So this is KCD's specific mission. Were you going to do this one, Jay, or do I want to jump on your slide?
Go ahead.
So our overarching goal is to promote the use of sustainable resources through stewardship. We have lots of services, though we did a great job listing a lot of the programs that we have. There's a few cities that do not fund our rates and charges, which is how we are funded through King County. Every parcel in King County pays a small tax fee on your property taxes each year, which funds all of our programs. There's a few like Enumclaw, Snohomish, or Skykomish, Milton. Who are the others, Jay?
Pacific and
Yeah.
Enumclaw.
That's right, thanks. But if you're interested if you live in those areas and are interested in our programming and what we offer, feel free to petition to your local elected officials to be incorporated into our area that we can help folks in.
Conservation districts were formed out of a great environmental and human tragedy that occurred in the Midwest in the 1930s. And of course, we're talking about the Dust Bowl. This was not only an environmental catastrophe where, trillions upon trillions of tons of soil blew from Kansas, the panhandle of Texas, and Oklahoma, but also as a human tragedy where not only people lost their lives, but also they were forced to relocate. And this tragedy was caused due to a combination of factors: poor farming practices, planting crops in a very arid part of the world, the advent of the tractor, and this land rush that occurred, pretty much during the end of World War I, where a combination of cheap land prices and a high demand for wheat caused just the turning over of the prairie. And those prairie soils constantly blow. At the time, there was a little bit more rainfall. And as that rainfall started to fall or reduce to its normal, 8, 9, 10 inches of rain, they just couldn't sustain the wheat production. And once that soil was loosened, it blew. And so the idea of the conservation district came out of this tragedy. And the thought was, instead of trying to mandate how farmers farm and what they plant and where they plant it, the idea was that let's form local soil districts. And local soil districts would be able to provide input that would help farmers, landowners, land managers decide on what makes sense for that area. So nationwide, we now have over 3,000 conservation districts. And in Washington state, we have 45. And each one works a little bit differently. It really depends on the geology, the geography, the people that are in the conservation district. And we work hand in hand with our sister federal agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So conservation districts and the federal government were able to form a partnership in order to help people help the land. Teddy Roosevelt said it really well. A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. We have a number of programs, and we kind of alluded to them. Hopefully, many of you know a few. Our soil nutrient testing program, we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. We also have an annual bare root native plant sale, and that's an event that occurs in the winter. We actually have the pickup this weekend, but we're mostly sold out. If you're interested, you should check out our website, kingcd.org, to see if there's any plants available. It operates mostly through a pre-order, but there might be a couple that are available. Volunteer programs as well as educational programs like this. We do shoreline restoration and riparian area restoration along streams and the marine shoreline. We have some forestry programs and wildfire programs. We do some community agriculture work, working with our community gardens in the county. Farm conservation management is a big part of what the conservation district does. We work one-on-one with landowners and land managers throughout rural and sometimes urban King County. We provide tools to help folks implement conservation practices, as well as an agricultural drainage program. In addition, we give out lots of grant money to individuals to do water quality, but also to our member cities to help them improve water quality or improve agriculture in their particular jurisdiction or education of their residents, as well as a regional food system grant program. And the idea behind that is we're going to help increase either the amount of food grown in King County or the amount of King County grown food that is consumed in our county.
All right, so we're just going to jump into a quick Soils 101. Before I jump to the next slide, I will just say, oh, it's okay, Jay. We say soil, Jay's in control of the slides today. We say the word soil instead of dirt because dirt is an offensive word if you're talking about soil in a sense, because what dirt means is soil devoid of all life, all nutrients, you know, none of the organic matter that you want in your soil. So the word dirt in our office is banned. So you'll notice we will not be using that today. Soil composition. So on the most basic level, like what is the soil under our feet? I think the first thing most people think about is the mineral content. So this mineral matter that's evolved from rock over time eroding into fine particulate matter. And then maybe the organic matter piece. And the organic matter piece is important because that's how nutrients are put back into our soil. And we'll talk a lot more about organic matter today. But that's essentially when the leaves fall from the trees in the fall. If you mow your lawn and leave the grass clippings there, that's organic matter. You know, all those important things. That's how organic matter naturally, pine needles organically makes its way into our soil. And the other components that people probably don't think of necessarily as much are the water and air components of soil. And so if you think of it like if you take a glass jar and fill it with different sized marbles, you're gonna have different spaces between those marbles. And in the larger spaces, you're gonna have air in the case for soil, and in the smaller spaces, you're gonna have water. And you want a certain percentage of each one of these things to make up that kind of perfect combination of soil. And there's ways to affect that in your management. And so kind of talking more about the mineral piece of soil, we talk about soil texture. For example, a lot of our soil around here is named like an Everett or Alderwood soil. And these soils were originated from glacial deposits. And they are we call them sandy, gravelly soils. And they literally are that. You will know if you have this soil type at your house because you probably have a rock problem sometimes. Or if you're trying to dig down, it doesn't take long to hit a lot of gravel and rock. There's pros and cons to every soil type. So a well-draining gravelly soil isn't so great at holding onto water because if you think of it like the glass jar with the marbles in it, if it's all large marbles, that's mostly going to be holding air. There's just large spaces around it. Clay, though, on the other hand, is the opposite of sand. And so there's another common soil type here called buckley. And this soil originated from when Mount Rainier erupted and there was a big mud flow. And so it has a high clay content. This soil is really great at holding water on the contrast to a sandy soil. The pros of this soil is it holds on to water as well, but it sometimes, for whatever your management is, sometimes it holds on to water too well. Say if you're, you might have a field that doesn't dry out until July if you're trying to grow hay, for example. And so it can be highly productive. Sandy soil we call droughty soil because it dries up in the summer when our rains stop. You'll notice your production stops. So what we're always trying to shoot for is that silt soil. That's our most productive soil because it has that perfect percentage of that sand and clay components mixed together. So you have just the right amount of airspace and soil that can hold water really well. And those soils around here, we typically call them of highly importance for farmland. So that's just a basics of soil texture. And then why do we care about healthy soil? We're gonna probably talk a lot about that today. And you might have ideas already about why soil is so important, but it really does have a lot of functions. It recycles our nutrients and supports plant growth. We're learning more and more about the importance of sequestering carbon, and it's very important for that, having healthy soil. It filters our water and allows for the infiltration of water. When soil is in healthy condition, it can do a great job at resisting disease and weeds. It also detoxifies chemicals. So if you're spraying an herbicide or a pesticide, the processes in the soil are what breaks that chemical down so that it's no longer present. And then through its, intrinsic abilities, it supports our food, fiber, and fuel economies. And a more underestimated feature of soil that we're kind of just now starting to pay more attention to is that it provides habitat, and habitat for what we call biofauna, or all those microorganisms and important insects and bugs that live in the soil. Just to touch on organic matter a little bit, just to break it down, it's present in 4 different forms in the soil. And so if you're taking it, say, for example, the fall, those leaves fall down from the trees. Now you've got that fresh residue. And then there's a component of that when it's decomposing organic matter. So the microorganisms, the bacteria in that soil are working that residue, breaking it down into that stable humus layer. And if you ever look at a soil profile, you'll see this thick, rich brown layer on the top. We call it the organic matter layer, where all those nutrients are being broken down. And then the living organisms that have a very important job in doing this, keeping this whole cycle going. So this is a video I love. Hopefully Jay can get it to play for us. We'll just play it. We're going to play the whole video. It's 2 minutes long, but just the first couple seconds will give you a snippet. But this is a really cool process called bioturbation. And so this is a video done that was filmed and then sped up that shows the difference between a soil profile that has no organic living organisms in it and one side that does. So I don't know if we can get it up and going, but that's okay if we can't. But it's really cool because you see all the bugs and the worms breaking down that top layer of leaves into the soil.
Is it not showing?
I don't see it. In my experience, it works 50% of the time, but that's okay. Maybe we can send it out later. We can send the YouTube video out with Madeline. I watched this video about 100 times. If you're a soil nerd like me, I probably think it's very cool. So, but we can switch over today. That's okay. I'll have Madeline send out the link.
So now we'll talk about the King Conservation District's soil nutrient testing program. So we have a soil testing program, and hopefully many of you have taken soil samples, but essentially we offer every resident within our district, which is most of King County, excluding those 5 cities, Federal Way, Enumclaw, Skykomish, Milton, and Pacific. And we offer each resident up to 5 tests for free. This is primarily a soil nutrient testing service where we can help folks sleuth problems. Sometimes it's really good in figuring out why my plants aren't growing or why something is not performing to what you expect. And so taking a soil test is a great way to kind of at least eliminate the nutrients. It can also be a great way to get a end of the season, how did I do? If you are using fertilizers or applying other materials over the course of the growing season, a soil test in the fall can report back to you, did I add too much? Did I put too much of nitrogen or too much phosphorus in the soil?
Jay, I'm sorry, I think we're stuck on the organic matter slide. I don't mean to interrupt you, I'm very sorry.
Oh,
For some reason. There we go. Sorry
screen.
about that, Jay.
Can you see the screen okay, everyone?
I think we're good.
Okay, sorry about that.
Mhm.
So our soil testing program is 5, and that's a lifetime per address. And so you can send those samples into us. This is how to take a soil sample. So if you're taking a sample in a pasture, you would take a sample that represents as much as the area as you can get. You want to take randomly located but evenly distributed. We usually recommend 10 to 15 samples. And even if you're taking it in your raised bed or in a small landscape, you still want to take a number of samples. That way you get some of the, the differences that are within an area. And so by taking one sample, you might skew it. There may have been more material applied there, or it might be artificially low. So taking a composite sample helps kind of even out the differences each spot might be located. Depending on the time of year, you might want to change your depth. In September and October, you're looking about 12 inches. And then the rest of the year, it's right around 4, down to 6 for commercial crops or trees. If you have a soil probe, or we rent out soil probes for free, so you could borrow one from us, it's a real easy way to collect samples. But if you have a shovel, you see in the diagram on the bottom, you just want to take a thin slice after you dig a small hole. That way you capture soil between either the 0 and 12-inch zone or the 0 and 6-inch zone, depending on your sample. We do need 3 pounds, and that's a change from a couple years ago. This is all detailed on our website. So this slide and some more information, so you don't have to remember everything. The better you take the sample, the better the results will be. This is the submittal form. So you would include this. This is downloadable as a PDF from our website. If you don't have a printer, you can grab one of these from our office and you can fill it out there. You can either mail your samples to us or you can drop them off at our office in Renton. I guess we need to edit this because it does say 2 cups, but we need 3 pounds. We'll need your name and address, phone number. We send all the results via email, so make sure we can read your emails. And then when you submit the sample, you'll want to put a sample ID and be sure you remember where that sample comes from. And then tell us a little bit about your crops. I will say, if you put raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, those 3 crops might need drastically different nutrient levels. So you might want to split it up into 3. They do have a mixed vegetable crop, so you can go ahead and put that if you have a diverse. But the more specific the crop, the better the results will be.
All right, well, now we'll jump into the understanding. So now you've taken your soil samples, you sent them into our office, or you sent them to a lab on your own. You've gotten these test results back. And so now you're going to try to use that information and knowledge to amend what your goals are for whatever area you're working on. So you might get something that looks like this. So this is what our standard results page would look like. And actually, part of the reason this presentation was created was because Jay especially was finding that he was getting tons of questions, and rightly so, from people getting this form and saying, what is it? What am I looking at? You know, this is a very technical form, and it could look like it's a completely different language to some folks because it's not the most user-friendly to understand. And we do send you with a guide with your results that you can read, which can be helpful. But we also thought that having this presentation and walking you through would be helpful. And really, if you can understand and decipher this results page, you have so much knowledge now then about how to what's in your soil and how to amend for it. And so we thought it was kind of all encompassing to kind of break this down. And so this is, so I'm just going to walk you and orient you through this, and then we'll talk more about how to use this knowledge. And this is a typical test results page. And so what that means is you'll see high organic matter and high phosphorus and low nitrogen. And we'll talk more about what that means. That's typical for our area. And so organic matter is the first value there. And so I just want to orient you so you have organic matter and then the lab recommendations below for amending for that. And so the organic matter level is very high here, so there's no need for amending in this situation. And so we'll just touch on organic matter. So the general range that you want to have for your levels is between about a 2 and a 5. We already kind of talked about how important organic matter is for soil health and creating living soil and soil texture. But the one thing we touched on in this slide also is that there is a little bit of too much of a good thing. And so if you're amending with a general fertilizer or compost year after year, you might be putting high levels of organic matter into your, say, your garden bed or something like that. And it can actually have a negative effect in the sense that temporarily you're putting so much organic matter in, the organisms and the microorganisms and the bacteria have to work so hard to break that material down, especially if there's a lot of carbon content, that they're using up the actual nutrients that you want in your soil. So you're temporarily immobilizing the nutrients that you're trying to put back in. And so if you feel like that's an issue, or you've been trying to troubleshoot problems, and you have this high level, one thing you can do is take a little bit of compost. So you're putting a little bit of that beneficial bacteria into the soil, or you can buy a soil inoculant and put it back in and try to boost those nutrient amounts and boost those good bacteria that you want in there to help break all that organic matter down and lower it a little bit, and then monitor your nitrogen levels, because nitrogen is going to be one of the things that really gets burnt up when bacteria are trying to break something down. Nitrogen is a big nutrient. We care a lot about this one because it gets in a lot of places we don't want it, like our rivers and our stream systems, which unfortunately most are contaminated to some degree. So we spend a lot of work trying to help people understand how to manage nitrogen levels. So you have your nitrogen level here and your lab recommendations for amending it here. And the reason why you'll see it so much lower than the others, and we'll talk more about this, is because nitrogen doesn't bind to soil and doesn't stick to soil like other nutrients do. And so when it rains, it gets flushed through the soil profile. And so, you know, one of the reasons why we offer free soil testing is because from our perspective as a conservation district, we want to empower you with the knowledge to not over apply, like to give you that control so you're not accidentally creating a situation where nutrients get into places that we don't want them to be. And so, and hopefully that also benefits you. Having this control helps you really hone in your productivity as well. But there's just two pieces to that, and nitrogen is a really important one. Phosphorus, just to touch on that here, it's the second of our big 3 nutrients that we're going to talk about. If you're wondering why there are 2 phosphorus tests, I just want to point out that it's very hard to test for phosphorus. and extract it out of the soil. And so they do a different test based on the pH of your soil type to get an accurate number. And so you'll see they use the weak Bray test in this situation because we have acidic soil here. So they did a test that's appropriate for that soil type. And then the phosphorus recommendations are in the lab below in the guidelines. So then we have our last big three nutrient of potassium. And the big three are nutrients that we have to put back into our soil in large quantities. So it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so you'll see it there, and then the lab recommendations below. And then from there, we'll talk a little. So I said the big three, but we call those macronutrients. So they're really important for plant growth, and we're always trying to amend for them. And so nitrogen is really important for all that green leafy matter. So if you're trying to grow a field of grass, super important for nitrogen. When you have a garden system, whatever you're trying to grow, it's all the leafy green matter for your plants, your vegetable plants. Like I said before, it can leach through the soil profile, and that's why we care a lot about it. It also, if it's in a different form of nitrogen, so there's nitrate that can leach through the soil profile, but ammonium nitrogen, when it's exposed to the atmosphere, can also volatilize, and you leave your soil profile that way. So we're trying to hold on to it and try to keep it where it belongs. There's different ways to do that we'll talk about. And there's also some plants that are really unique, legumes, that can fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil for you. So instead of needing nutrients, you can plant a clover or anything in the pea family, and they will actually create these little nodules in the root systems that are pumping nitrogen into the soil for you. So they're giving you free nutrients. Phosphorus is very important for seed and fruit production. Seed heads, fruit, vegetables, it's really important. It's also a big polluter in waterways if it gets where it doesn't belong, but it's not as mobile as nitrogen because it sticks to soil. And so it's generally not an issue unless you have a soil erosion problem. And potassium is great for overall plant growth. We don't worry about it as much. It's generally not as considered as much of a pollution problem, but it also is in our organic matter and plays a big role in a lot of different processes for plant production. So our secondary nutrients are calcium and magnesium. You'll see them there. They're kind of a package deal in terms of management. And I'll talk about why that is. And then there's also sulfur. And the way to amend for calcium and magnesium will be in the bottom corner, either dolomite or lime. And we'll talk more about that. And the other thing I just want to touch on this slide is that they have sodium on here, your sodium levels. And there is no known desirable amount of sodium that you want in your soil profile. There's other parts of the country that have big salt problems, but fortunately here we don't have to worry about it, but it does list your salt. It's usually not an issue. It's usually pretty low levels here. So calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are all important for plants, plant productivity. Calcium is really important for cell walls, and magnesium and sulfur actually are really important for photosynthesis. And some products that you can get if you're going to amend for them with low lime or pelletized lime or dolomite, you can go to Home Depot or McLennan's, and you'll see these bags there, 50-pound bags in different forms, in the powdered form. And you can also get these bags of sulfur there to put down and amend the soil. Soil pH, as I mentioned earlier, our soils are very acidic. They're historic forest soils, and with all the rain that we get annually, they naturally want to be on the acidic side. And when you're amending for calcium and magnesium, that naturally impacts the pH of your soil, and we'll talk more about why that is. Gardens generally, based on what the soil scientists say at WSU, if you're doing like a vegetable garden, soil generally needs to be around a 6.5. And so that's a big adjustment from like a 5.6 that's on this slide. So boosting your pH can also give you a lot of help with productivity. So an interesting thing about pH and soil chemistry is that nutrients can be in the soil and present, but unavailable because the soil is so acidic. Nutrients like to bind to things in acidic conditions, like phosphorus likes to bind to iron, and it's not available to the plants. And so a cool thing is if you add lime or dolomite and raise the pH of your soil up, you're freeing those nutrients. They're unbinding from things and now becoming available. So it's sort of a way of accessing what's already in your soil without having to add more. And so, you know, even at KCD, we have a lime spreader that folks can run out as a way to be able to apply lime to your property. But you can also do it by hand or a lot of other techniques. I'll just briefly touch on micronutrients. If you notice on the soil test that we showed you, the results page, there's no information about these micronutrients because we don't test for them, because they're typically non-issues because they're not needed in large quantities. And general composted manure and products have a good source of micronutrients in them. So generally, they're more tests that you can do if you're really trying to dial in a specific problem or just really trying to test for something in a specific plant. And I've known a few master gardeners that have tested for it and found you know, interesting issues here, but in general, you can add it on to our general test, but we would not test that for you unless you wanted to add it on. Yeah, lastly, I'll just talk about cation exchange capacity, but we won't go into a whole lot of depth here because you can't control it, but it is listed on here, so I wanted to talk about it. But it's kind of an intrinsic part of soil, depending on just the nature of the soil type that you have where you live. So you'll see the number there of what your cation exchange capacity is. And then on the right side there, it lists the percentage of nutrients or elements that are in each, that are making up the components of that. So a really good analogy that someone came up with about cation exchange capacity and how to explain it is like the number of parking spots in a parking lot for cars. So soil particles have a negative charge, and these cations, nutrients as cations, can stick to the soil. And so the more soil particles you have, the more parking spots you have. And so when soil has more clay component, there's more higher cation exchange capacity. And same with organic matter. The more organic matter you have, the more higher cation exchange capacity. So more capacity for the soil to hold nutrients in a sense. That's very hard to change and modify though. It's really tied to the inherent nature of your soil. And so it would take years and years to change. So I'm telling you about it so you're aware of it on the test, but I don't want you to worry about trying to amend for that or try to control that. There's lots of other ways to amend your soil that we're going to talk about.
Great, thanks, Megan. So now that we have a basic understanding of the soil test, well, now what? I know we know a little bit about what it means. So my plan for the next couple minutes is kind of to share how to interpret the soil test in order to improve fertility. Like Megan said, down here on the bottom, this is the recommendations that the lab is making based on the results up above. In this particular soil test, the results are given in pounds per 1,000 square feet. And you can see that on the bottom right. If you made a soil test and you were asking for a pasture or a crop that's much larger, cornfield, it's going to give results in pounds per acre. So like I said, this particular test, it's saying 210 pounds of dolomite per 1,000 square feet of bed. Now, what happens if you don't have 1,000 square feet? I had someone today email me and they were like, well, I have 50. And as you would expect, you just reduce by the percentage. So theirs was, a lot less. I think they needed 9 pounds of lime versus 180. And so on and so forth for the different elements that are on the bottom. Now, if you're looking at a fertilizer product, there are generally 3 numbers, and this will apply to any type of fertilizer. If it's organic, inorganic, all products have a guaranteed analysis associated with it. And it's the 3 numbers. The first one is nitrogen, the second one is phosphate, and the third one is potash. So in this particular example, where you have here, we have a 10-10-10. So a 50-pound bag of that product, it would be 10% of each element. 10% phosphate, 10% or nitrogen, 10% phosphate, 10% potash. So here we would have 5 pounds of each. If we had an 18-18-18, right, we would have something real similar, except for it's 18%, and so on and so forth. I have an example down here in the bottom. It's blood meal, 1300. So it's 13% nitrogen and 0% the rest. So in this example, our recommendation from the lab is that we need 3.1 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And great, we have 100 square feet. So we take that 3.1 pounds and we reduce it by 90%, and we get 0.31 pounds of actual nitrogen. The next step for us to do is pick our supplement, and I'm going to use blood meal, and here it's 1400, and so that means it's 14%. What I like to do is make a proportion, and so 1 pound of blood meal is 0.14 pounds. So I just did a little conversion from 100 pounds needing 14, being 14 pounds of nitrogen. Excuse me. So 1 pound would be 0.14. And then equals question mark over 0.31, because we need 0.31 pounds of nitrogen. And we solve for the question mark. And so we would need 2.21 pounds of blood meal per 100 square feet to get that 0.31, or in the case of the lab's report, 3.1 pounds per 1,000. So it's a little tricky, but once you do this once or twice, you'll be like, oh yeah. Now, one thing you have to do, you have to be aware of, the lab may say you need different numbers. And so you might not have a product that's going to supply all 3. And in that case, you might have to pick 2 or 3 different products in order to get the amount of nutrients, the amount of nitrogen, the amount of phosphate, the amount of potash that you need. There are a lot of different websites that are out there that go through and how to figure this out. And so a lot of times I look this up and it is really helpful. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about using compost as a fertilizer. I will say compost is not a uniform product, right? We might be decomposing things like tree branches or leaves. Those are very low in nutrients. And the compost that comes out of that product is also going to be low in nutrients, especially nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The feedstocks are really important in the end result. Now, it might look similar, but compost doesn't always make a great fertilizer. So you want to be real careful relying on that as a fertilizer. Compost management is going to be an important part in what type of, especially nitrogen, is left in the compost. Applying compost should be done as soon as possible to when the crops need them. You don't want to apply it before rain events. Manure composts tend to have a little bit more NP and K than yard waste does, but it can be very variable. And we do want to just remind folks that applying raw manure to food crops can be dangerous depending on how well it's composted or if it is raw. You just want to be real careful because there are foodborne illnesses or fecal coliform contamination that can occur if you eat some of that product inadvertently. So you do want to be real careful. At the King Conservation District, we have a manure match program. So we manage a list of farmers that have manure, and that we update fairly regularly. And as a gardener, if you're interested, you would contact a particular farmer, and if they have extra material, you can work with them to collect it. With the care that you're not applying it real soon to when you're going to harvest. We'll mention dolomite and lime. These are two of the most common liming agents. And like Megan said, dolomite will help adjust both magnesium and calcium. And lime or limestone, you apply if you only have low calcium. But both of these adjust pH. And in the bottom there, that's a picture of our lime drop spreader that is available for rent. Cover crops are also a great way to incorporate nitrogen in particular, but also organic matter. A lot of our cover crops, particularly legumes, do fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and it can put it into the soil. But there's also other great reasons why we might use cover crops. It can help reduce erosion from wind and water, especially during the winter. That cover crop, if you mix it into the soil or let it decompose on the top, can provide organic matter. Sometimes we call it a green manure. It can capture and recycle nutrients. So if we're at the end of the season and we're planting a cover crop, it might scavenge the soil for that excess nitrogen and put it in the plant. And then in the spring, the new plants that we want to grow can utilize that. Like I said, fix nitrogen. Some crops better than others. Grasses less so. Legumes, clovers do fix nitrogen. We can suppress weeds, can help with managing moisture. And some cover crops are really good at minimizing or reducing compaction or plow pans really deep. So some take-home thoughts when thinking about using a soil test results and all the things that we learned. You definitely want to think about your organic matter and manage that appropriately. Manage your nitrogen, not only applying or having enough for the plants to use, but not having too much, since nitrogen leaches and it goes into the atmosphere. pH is real important. So you want to make sure that your soils are the right pH for your crops. And I saw it on the slide, and I will just mention it. For soils that are high in organic matter, a low pH soil has reduced soil microbial activity. So it just slows the nitrogen cycle down when you have too much organic matter in that low pH. And you don't have to fix everything all at once. Gardening is part science and it's part art. So just because you get the soil test results and it says, oh my gosh, I'm the worst gardener in the world, there's so many things wrong. Like with just gardening, it's a process, it's a learning process. So go real slow and don't think like you have to add all these products all at once. Experiment. try changing your pH. Go real slow, because you'll find you'll learn as you continue to garden. And that's all we have tonight. And I hope you don't hear my dogs barking. They're outside now. But Megan, do you have anything to add? Or do you have any other questions? I
The one
guess
thing
we'll
I
start
was-
on questions.
Yeah, I just had a comment really quick. I was thinking about it when you were talking, because we talk about we have 5 free soil tests, and I just wanted to let folks know that you're not limited to 5. There would be a $25 fee if Jay didn't mention that earlier, so you don't feel like you could just use up your 5, then you're stuck. And then you can also, if you're interested, you can also add a heavy metals test. There's an additional fee for that, but if you're interested in heavy metal testing, you can do that too.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's take some questions.
There is a question related to that number of soil tests you get, just a clarification. If we want to sample veggie beds, which would be sample 1, raspberry bed sample number 2, and blueberry bed sample number 3 all at the same time, is that 1 of 5 free tests or 3 of 5 free tests?
That would be 3 of 5. Each one of those would be a 3-pound sample, and it would be 3 of your 5 free tests.
Thank you. And then we got a question about the manure spreader. We have some people who want to renovate 1.5 acres of horse pasture along Highway 202 in unincorporated Redmond. How well can we drive home your rented manure spreader, then mow grass, spread manure, and spread grass seeds on a hill up to 30%? The context being they are 77 years old.
Okay, well, our manure spreader does come on a trailer, so I would look at our website, kingcd.org, and go to our rental tool section, and it will tell you everything about how to rent it, how much it costs, but it's transportable on a trailer, so that's pretty easy. Certainly you could spread it on a horse pasture. That's perfect, using that composted horse manure. On a steep slope, of course, you want to be really careful because it's steep and turning could be an issue. I have had people have issues just driving on wet pasture. So you do want to make sure you're spreading in a really dry part of the year. And 77 is wonderful. Maybe have a helper, but I'm sure that if you can still utilize it.
Great, thank you. Another question from Mason. So if one has raised beds that aren't on top of soil, where should they get their hands on some soil fauna? We might need a clarification here. I'm assuming they're asking about, like, if you're just putting soil in a raised bed, does it have all of the life that you want in it? And if not, what do you do? Mason, if that's not what you mean, please feel free to share more specifics in the chat.
Is that more pertaining, sorry, Jay.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that more pertaining, are you worried that you have high organic matter levels that you're trying to lower? Or if you're just worried about boosting the microbial activity in your soil? Like I said, kind of depends. You can buy soil inoculants, which are beneficial bacteria. I haven't purchased them before, but that essentially is giving your soil a boost of kind of activity for breaking down nutrients.
I mean, I will say that soil microbes migrate pretty quickly. So you're very likely to have not only microbes, bacteria, fungi that come with the imported material, but there's also colonies in the soil that's underneath. I mean, they say something like in a teaspoon of soil, there's like 1 billion soil organisms. It's an incredible amount. So unless you've bought something really strange, you're more than likely have some. I know people will add compost teas and things like that to boost the microbial activity, as well as the inoculants that Megan was talking about.
Well, and we heard from Mason in the chat, and it sounds like that did answer the question. All right. From Lore, we have a large amount of eggshells saved, even baked and crushed. Do they do anything for calcium?
Well, from my experience, putting my own eggshells through my worm bin is the eggshells don't break down very quickly. And after the worms went through and then I dumped it in my garden, I had eggshells everywhere. So, is it adding calcium to your soil? Very likely. Is it adding a lot of calcium to your soil? Quickly, probably not. But over time, it will break down. So if your soil test result says you need calcium and you have low pH, lime is not that expensive. So I would just say buy a bag of lime and apply that. Is it hurting anything? Probably not.
Just so folks know, lime is a non-toxic amendment. So you don't have to worry about putting a chemical type thing onto your ground.
And then a quick follow-up question. Do you think it makes a difference if you grind up the eggshells?
Sure. Yeah, I think if you ground up the eggshells, it would be more available.
Great. Thank you.
Have that coffee grinder that's labeled very well.
And then should we get our compost tested before we apply it?
You can get a compost test and it will tell you what the NPK is, what the organic matter or the water content. So it can be a great way to know exactly what you're spreading.
A great tip too, if you're managing your own compost, is if you can cover it, especially in the winter when it rains, with a tarp or a roof, that's going to help preserve a lot of the nitrogen in there. So, because the rainfall will wash it out. So.
Great. What's the turnaround time for the soil tests?
Well, it's a great question. It does depend highly on the time of year. Now that we're going into spring, of course, the last week we've had, it doesn't feel like we're coming into spring with a little snow, or at least I had snow, and Zoe said she had a few inches. But as we get closer to spring, the soil lab gets busier, and so they take a little bit longer. We typically ship our samples down to the lab, and we use A&L Agricultural Labs, and they're in Portland. So we ship our samples on Thursday. So if you can get your samples to us before Thursday, it will go out in that week's shipment. And we usually check our mail Thursday morning before we package. So even if it arrived on Thursday, we usually ship it, right around 2. So they'll get the results on Friday. In the busy season, it might take a week or two for them. Well, okay, in the busy season, it might take them 2 weeks to get the results back to us. During the winter and the late fall, it might only take a week to get the results back to us. I usually say 3 weeks.
All right, great. We are getting lots of questions, so I'm just going to keep going. This one might take a little bit of clarification. Every year my cherry tree starts off great, then the seeds dry up. Is there anything I can do? That's from Carl. I'm assuming he means that like the cherries are drying up.
You might want to consult with a master gardener. I'm not a cherry expert, So, and I know a lot of master gardeners are at our farmers markets, and there's probably even a WSU Master Gardener hotline. I'd say that would be a better question for the Master Gardener.
I just put the link to the Master Gardeners for King County in the chat. So hopefully that is helpful. Is it possible to test soil for glyphosate residues?
It is, but our lab does not do that. You'd have to work with a pesticide testing lab. And there's a few around. I know a couple years ago, we worked with someone and there was a lab down in the Portland area. But I would just say a quick keyword search on your internet browser, pesticide residue testing lab, and you'd have to work directly with them. But you can test for it. It's a little bit pricey. It's probably $150 per sample.
All right, thank you. What advice do you have about using compost tea?
I think it's a good product. Megan, do you have anything to say about it?
Yeah, I think it has all the same advantages of a standard compost, I would say. I don't know. Probably great.
All right. Do you have any information regarding fish composts? And then they're specifically asking about a product named Ollie's Fish Compost. But people might want some fish compost info in general as well.
Yeah, I mean, if they're calling it compost versus a fertilizer, that would be my first question. And then my second question would be, what is it, all fish, or are they adding a lot of organic matter? I would look at the bag, on the back of the bag, to see if it has a guaranteed nutrient analysis. So I'd look into the product to make sure you understand, is it going to act more like a fertilizer or is it acting more like a compost? Because it might just be fish with a lot of sawdust. And in that case, it's not going to really act so much like a great fertilizer. But I know they sell fish fertilizer, which is just, fish ground up and dried. So depending on how you want to use the product, I'm sure it's helpful.
I've seen some organic compost that have that they sell with the fish component in it.
Yeah,
but you could tell it was in there when you open the bag.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I bet my dogs would love it.
Yeah.
Cat would probably love it too. They'd be all over it. So you want to be careful using something that has a strong odor, because you might attract dogs, cats, raccoons. Everyone likes a little fish dinner now and again.
I can attest that my cats will roll around in the dirt after we apply anything fishy. I'm sorry, I said dirt.
Yeah.
All right. What about adding coffee grounds to plants like rhododendrons?
I would just be careful, just understanding what is the nutrient analysis, if there is one, that you just understand what you're applying. Is it what is the NPK? And then what is the pH? How is it adjusting the pH? So I think it's a fine product. It'll make the garden smell pretty nice, but just understand what you're applying and then how much. I don't have, you would apply this many pounds per 100 square feet. I don't have that in my head. So you could probably do some research. I'm sure somebody, a grad student, has done the research on how much coffee grounds. And at a certain point, is it lowering the pH too much? But I think overall, it probably wouldn't be a bad thing to do around your rhododendrons. But like any product, like what is your current pH, what's your desired pH, and how much does it take to get there?
Great. All right, we have a question from Ann Davis. Reading this, I think we might need a little more information. She says, my results from my veggie bed said to add 0.6 pounds per 1,000 square feet. What product do I use to meet this? Am I correct that we are missing some
Which
information?
nutrients specifically?
Yeah, and if you could let us know which nutrient you're asking about, we can. Sulfur.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter necessarily. Well, it will matter depending on what nutrient, but the first thing you would do if your soil test results said 0.6 pounds per 1,000 square feet, the first thing you do is either increase or decrease it based on your actual square footage. Then you'll understand, okay, I need more or less than the 0.6. Then depending on the nutrient, you would look for a product, and again, organic, inorganic. There are benefits and drawbacks to using inorganic products as well as organic products. But depending on the nutrient, you would look for a product that has the nutrient that you're looking for. There are nitrogen-only fertilizers, there are phosphate-only fertilizers, there are potash-only fertilizers. And then a quick internet search on any of those will come up with the answers.
It looks like specifically she's curious about sulfur and is not sure where to buy sulfur or something.
Yeah, I mean, so you're looking for sulfate sulfur on a fertilizer on the guaranteed analysis. That would be the fourth number. Elemental sulfur is not a good product when you want to increase sulfur in the soil. It takes a long time to turn into sulfate sulfur. I believe there's a product called murate of sulfur. I have a cheat sheet on my computer. If you email me, actually, I will forward you that cheat sheet because I don't remember the product exactly right now, and I can't get to that screen without messing everything up. But if you email me, I'll send it out, and I'll also share it with Madeline so she can send out it to everyone.
Great. All right. And I think the last question we have, so if you still have a question that you haven't put in a chat, now is your moment. But we have a question about worm casings. Do they have value?
Megan, what do you think about worm casings?
Yeah, they're great. So just for general reference, WSU down in Puyallup has a giant research worm bin that they're studying that has thousands and thousands of worms in it. And yeah, that's a great source of nutrients. If you have a worm bin, absolutely. The one thing I was going to say about sulfur, just going back to that really quick too, is that if you were concerned about the percentage they were recommending, that sounds right to me. You usually don't need sulfur in very large quantities, unless you disagree, Jay. But usually
It's really teeny.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jay and Megan, for that wonderful presentation. Really great job. I hope that folks who are in attendance tonight learned something new and might take advantage of some of what KCD has to offer in the future. We have our contact information listed up here, and we're also going to be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who signed up and attended this webinar with additional resources, anything that we may have mentioned that we'd be happy to share after the presentation, as well as a link to a recording of this evening's presentation. So if there's anything you want to go back and revisit, feel free to do so. But really appreciate your time and hope to see you again in the future at another KCD event. Hope you all have a really great evening.